Well, those of us who are in the men's Bible study group that meets on Thursday morning are in the process of studying and struggling and sorting out what it is that the book of Revelation is telling us. And in that vision, in that revelation that John or someone who wrote the book for this revelation used a lot of imagery, a lot of symbols that oftentimes come out of the Old Testament. Daniel and Ezekiel and a score of others. These imageries require, in a sense, a person to go back and check the Old Testament, see what the quote is all about, and then make some effort to understand both the imagery in terms of the beasts and the numbers, and there are all kinds of numbers. The number 3 is used frequently, the number 7 is used frequently, the number 12 is used frequently. 1,000 is important, 1,000 days or years. And then 144,000 is referenced as being those who are going to make it into the kingdom, and is oftentimes misunderstood as meaning that's it. If you're not part of that 144,000, you might as well get your fireproof clothing on because you're heading in the bad place. Well, the author gave us those images, and part of what we tried to do is sort them out, and it's been difficult, I must say. Yet challenging and interesting, and it's added to our discussion and to our debate, and sometimes to our different points of view as to what John is trying to tell us. But very clearly, what we have really said we need to do is try to understand what it is that this message is saying to us about us. About me, about you, any of us who are studying. What's it say in terms of what is our need and how might that need be met so that we don't continue to live our lives in a way that is dysfunctional and hurtful and painful, not only to others, but ultimately to ourselves. And what that message tells us about the incredible gift of God's grace. Now, there have been attempts over the years to use this message to draw poetry. And so very clearly, Dante's Divine Comedy, called the Inferno by many, doesn't seem to be a comedy, frankly, but it is a rather lengthy poem that describes the ways in which we are called on to live our lives faithfully, to be moral, to be ethical, to be faithful to the call of God and following Jesus. And then what happens when we fail and fall, and if we reject that message. Others have found in individual messages other things. And interestingly enough, there are thousands of predictions of the end time that have come as a result of the belief that that end would come tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or on my next birthday or whatever it may be. John Wesley even thought about the possibility of the end time and identified a particular time when it would happen. You may remember the trauma that was exhibited by so many who thought that the end time would occur when the clock struck midnight on 1999 and we went into 2000. Some rather sad and on some levels hilarious descriptions of folks who thought the end time was coming and responded to it, and then were totally disappointed, and then recalculated as to when it would occur. But these are all symbols. Now, symbols are so much a part of our lives. Nancy and I, as we were getting out the decorations for our Christmas tree, one of the very first items that I latched onto was the a paper mache angel that we have that goes on the top of our tree, which we purchased, by the way, over 58 years ago. Isn't that something? But it reminds us not only of the joy of Christmas and the proclamation that came to the world that Jesus was born, but it reminds us of our early Christmas days in the Elo Pickett parsonage, which was by then a 100-year-old building. And when the wind came up, the curtains moved in the wind because it was so porous. And in the springtime, when there was much wind and the farmers in the area were cultivating their fields, if it was a little dry, we also got a little bit of a level of dust on the windowsill that came from the outside. We also were inhabited by friendly mice. But it reminds us of that. And so the symbol is important. Now, there are other symbols that are hateful symbols, as you well know, as we watch the intrusion and the forceful entry into our capital. We saw the hate symbols of the Ku Klux Klan and the hatred of the anti-Semitic folks and others. It's just tragic that we find ways to symbolize both joy and happiness as well as hatred and harm and evil to others. Well, the symbols that came to Jesus occurred during a meal, and it was a symbolic meal, really, in so many ways. It was a meal about the Passover. It was the time when the people of Israel began to find a way to get out of Egypt from their captivity. They were, in a sense, saved from their being held captive and enslaved by the people and the armies and the rulers of Egypt. And so the Passover meal is full of symbols. I'm going to suggest, if we can find somebody to give us some leadership, that for our Passover Seder experience on Maundy, Thursday, we need to come together and experience that Passover, because it uses both whatever is on the table intentionally to symbolize specific events of captivity and suffering and pain and the joy of knowing that they were free again, as well as the food that's eaten, which has very special meaning for the Jewish family or a congregation that gathers. So Jesus wanted to have that meal with his disciples because he knew that his own captivity to death was surely imminent. And so he gathered the disciples together, and then during the meal, toward the end, he lifted up bread and he said, after a prayer, thanking God for this gift of that which very simply one cannot live without nourishment. He said, take this and eat it. This is my body. Now, there's been argument over the years as to whether that meant bingo at that moment it became Jesus' body, or whether in fact it was symbolic of his body. And most of us within the United Methodist Church understand that as symbolic. It was Jesus' way of identifying something very significant. And whenever you eat this bread in my name, he says, remember that my body will be broken and damaged and injured, and it will be destroyed. Not uselessly, not for nothing, but because I want to let you know that God's grace of sacrificial love is what I'm all about. And when that happens, you'll know that you are free if you believe in me. And then he took the cup. Now, bread and wine were important in that meal because the wine likewise symbolized for Jesus his blood. I've often wondered as a child How come blood is red when I'm told it's not red in your veins? And what I'm told, of course, is that when it's oxidated and given air, it turns red. And so the wine is appropriate for Jesus to say, after he again gives God thanks for the fruit of the vine. And then he says, as he gives them the cup, take this. This is my blood, shed for you and for all, that you might have life and have it abundantly. I've often thought, if on a Sunday morning when we're having communion, we had no bulletin, and the only thing we did at the beginning was a call to worship and sing the song, and the bread and the cup were there on the table, and nothing else was said. Nothing else was said. Would you come forward and take the bread and take the cup? Or do you need me to invite you to do that? I would hope not. Because very clearly what Jesus says, whenever you gather together, in essence, when you see the bread and see the cup, remember me and take it. Take it. Now, one of the most delightful images, as I indicated last week in Revelation, is that image of Jesus who says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. I stand at the door and knock. It's like Jesus says, I'm here. And then it's up to us to respond. Jesus doesn't force the door open. Jesus doesn't take the handle, because in most pictures, there is no handle on the door. We must respond and say, I'm here. I hear you. So I say to you this morning, I don't invite you to this table. It is the Lord who invites you. It is Jesus who once again says to you, come, come, take this bread, take this cup. And as you do, remember the sacrificial love through God's grace, that you might have life and have it abundantly, and a life that cannot be captured by death. Because I love you, I care about you, and I want you to be free. That was the message of the Passover meal. It is now the message of this meal, which we now receive. Let us hear prayers on behalf of others this morning. And then there is an opportunity to pray the prayer of Jesus and a prayer of confession.